For over a century, Australia has dreamed of transforming its barren, sun-baked interior. Imagine creating a vast inland sea, stretching over 1,000 kilometers across the Outback, a project that would reshape the very heart of the continent. This is no fictional scene from Mad Max Fury Road or Waterworld, it's a real vision, an endeavor to turn Australia's dry desert into a Mediterranean-style sea. The cost of such an undertaking, a mind-blowing $200 billion, a sum that would not only alter the landscape but change the very climate of Australia. But here's the twist. This was not a new idea. In fact, Australia once had its own inland sea, known as the ancient Aramonga Sea, which covered much of central Australia between 140 to 100 million years ago. During this period, prehistoric marine reptiles and giant ammonites thrived in these waters. In many ways, the vision of recreating this inland sea wasn't about inventing something from scratch. Instead, it was an attempt to restore what nature had once built. The surprising part is that this ancient dream has been secretly revived, this time with the help of cutting-edge technology. Climate scientists now believe that building this sea could be Australia's only hope against its Achilles heel, catastrophic drought. But the question remains, would flooding a desert with water save a nation, or would it doom it? To understand the scale of this vision, we need to go back to the 1800s. European explorers, like Charles Sturt, ventured into Australia's red centre expecting to find a massive inland river or a grand lake. What they discovered instead was a dry, barren land with no sign of the waterway they had anticipated. Sturt famously wrote in his journal, "I could not help thinking that some great convulsion had torn these regions asunder." Despite this, the idea of an inland sea never quite vanished. In the 1930s, John Bradfield, one of Australia's greatest engineers and the man behind the Sydney Harbour Bridge, proposed a bold idea: redirect floodwaters from Queensland's tropical rivers into the Lake Eyre Basin, a depression 15 meters below sea level. His plan was to build a network of dams, pumps, and canals stretching to 1,300 kilometers, which would eventually fill the basin and create a sea larger than Belgium. This inland sea, Bradfield argued, would cool the continent's climate, generate hydropower, and create farmland as fertile as California's Central Valley. But why was Bradfield so obsessed with Lake Eyre? Let's take a closer look. Australia's outback is often described as a giant bathtub. The Lake Eyre Basin covers 1.2 million square kilometers, about 17% of the continent. Its lowest point lies 15 meters below sea level, and during rare floods, rivers like Diamantina and Cooper Creek rush in, filling the basin with water in a matter of weeks. The catch is that the basin is endorheic, meaning that water flows in but doesn't flow out. In wet years, it turns into a shimmering oasis. In dry years, it becomes a salt-crusted wasteland. To create a permanent sea in this basin, Bradfield would have needed to overcome three major hurdles: water volume, evaporation, and salinity. First, the water volume. Filling Lake Eyre would require 300 cubic kilometers of water, which is equivalent to 600 Sydney harbors. Second, evaporation. The Outback's scorching 40 Celsius summers would evaporate water at a rate 10 times faster than the rainfall could replenish it. And third, salinity. Without an outlet, salt would accumulate, turning the sea into a lifeless, salty wasteland. Bradfield's plan became a rallying cry for Depression-era Australia. Politicians hailed it as a job-creating bonanza. Farmers dreamt of irrigation. But by the 1940s, the project stalled, largely because of two insurmountable opponents: physics and mathematics. Engineers calculated that the evaporation rate would drain the sea faster than rivers could fill it. Even with the canals, the basin would lose 3 meters of water annually, requiring constant refilling. The estimated cost of the project ballooned from $10 billion to $200 billion, far more than the cost of building the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Worse, tampering with river systems could have threatened fragile ecosystems and indigenous communities who depended on the rivers for their livelihoods. By the 1960s, the world was watching the Soviet Union's Aral Sea disaster, where rivers had been diverted to fuel agriculture, causing the sea to shrink by 90% and create toxic dust storms. Australia took note. By the 1970s, the Bradfield scheme was officially shelved, but the dream of an inland sea didn't fade. In 2020, a new proposal emerged: the Australian Inland Sea Project 2.0. This time, The plan was to use solar-powered desalination plants on the coast to pump seawater 600 kilometers inland. Supporters argue that salt water would reduce evaporation, and the water would help boost rainfall through lake-effect weather patterns. The solar energy would make it a sustainable project, but the critics fired back. The cost of the pipelines alone was estimated at $200 billion, and salinity remained a significant concern. The next hurdle was salinity. A saltwater sea would sterilize the soil, rendering agriculture impossible. And then there were the indigenous rights. The Lake Eyre Basin lies on the ancestral land of the Arabana people, and flooding it would risk erasing centuries of culture and sacred sites. Adding urgency to the debate, Australia's droughts have been intensifying. The 2019 to 2020 Black Summer saw entire towns run dry, and many lives were lost in the devastating drought. Could an inland sea buffer Australia against these increasingly severe droughts? Or would it just be a temporary fix that fails to address the deeper issues? If the inland sea were built, here's what might happen. Within the first year, the basin would fill to 30% capacity, creating a shallow lake visible from space. By year 3, salinity would reach critical levels, turning the water turquoise. By year 5, microclimate changes would begin, with rainfall increasing by up to 15% within a 100 kilometers radius. By year 10, cities would develop along the shores, sparking a real estate boom. But by year 50, the ecosystem would either collapse due to hypersalinity or create a thriving new biosphere unlike anything seen before in Australia. 5 million years ago, the Mediterranean Sea almost evaporated during the Messinian salinity crisis. The Atlantic burst through the Strait of Gibraltar, refilling the basin and triggering a biodiversity explosion. Could Australia's inland sea trigger a similar renewal? It's theoretically possible, but the project faces immense challenges. Unlike the Mediterranean, which refilled naturally, Australia's scheme relies on artificial pumps, a fragile lifeline that might not survive. Even with new technologies, like graphene desalination filters or salt mining solutions, the project remains a long shot. But the biggest obstacle is ethical. The Arabana people consider Lake Eyre a sacred site. As Elder Aaron Stewart said, "Our stories are written in this land. You can't drown them." Economically, the project might never pay off. Australia's mining boom made the country wealthy without mega engineering projects. So why gamble on a sea that could destroy ecosystems and alienate indigenous communities? The idea of an inland sea remains a test of ambition. Some see it as a climate solution, others see it as a colonial fantasy. Yet, despite its failures, the dream persists. As the droughts worsen, this debate might resurface. But for now, Australia continues its struggle against the desert. So, what do you think? Should Australia gamble billions on a man-made sea, or invest those resources in smaller, smarter water solutions? Would creating the sea save a continent or destroy it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.